Sprinkle.
Well, hello, Leo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we had just a couple minutes to talk ahead of the show, and I think I mentioned could you get a little bit closer to the phone? The show producer is saying you just need to be a little bit closer, if you would.
How's this? Is that better?
Oh, I can tell. Yes, that's real good. Thank you.
Okay.
I have heard your name since I started looking at this topic. Your name comes up all the time.
I've been around a long time.
Yeah. Can you go into your background, if you would, how you got interested in the topic? And
sure.
Basically, I'd really be interested in, first of all, how you got interested, but what was the first, case or whatever that you looked into?
Yeah, I got interested because of my own experiences. When I was a child, I had experiences I couldn't understand, explain, nightmares. And later, as I got older, I was able to understand more about what had happened. But consciously, the first event was in 1949 when a buddy and I, at the University of Colorado, we were students there, we had a sighting. We were walking along the campus near the Arts and Science building, and we were playing this little game because we'd heard a speaker talk about science and reality and what's true and what's not true. And so we were playing this little game. Well, what do you see over there? Well, I call it a tree. Well, how do you describe it? Well, it's got a trunk and it's got branches and it's got leaves. I think it has roots, but I can't see them because they're under the ground. And then my friend looked over and said, what do you see over there? And what was it? Well, I looked at it. It wasn't an airplane, it wasn't a balloon. It looked elliptical, like a lens, and there was a light gleaming on the edge as if the sunlight was reflecting on it. So we talked about it, but we didn't want to tell anybody else because flying saucers in 1949 weren't readily accepted by the public. Then my wife and I had a sighting after I came back from Germany. When I graduated, I went into U.S. Army overseas and came back and in graduate school at the University of Colorado Boulder. And we were coming back from Denver one evening on top of the hill looking over the valley, and we saw this strange light. It would hover and then it would move, it would hover and move. Well, it wasn't an airplane. We didn't know what it was. We saw several car lights down below. I assumed other people were stopping like we did and getting out and looking at it. And then after a while, it went north and disappeared from view. But the feeling I had inside was, twice now. I've been given an opportunity to see something anomalous. So I knew that I had to study the phenomena. I also knew that it'd be lonely and perceived as weird.
Really? Yeah.
So I said, okay, let's get a doctorate. And that way, instead of being crazy, you're just merely eccentric. And so I went to the University of Missouri and graduated with a Ph.D. doctorate in philosophy with a specialty in counseling psychology. In 1961, went to the University of North Dakota, and after I had the results of the dissertation published, I studied the permanence of vocational interests in men based upon measured vocational interests. After I had that published, then I started doing UFO studies. I wrote to various people.
Can you tell me approximately what year that was right after?
Yeah. 1962. I went to 1961 when I graduated from University of Missouri. Then went to North Dakota, and so it was 62, 63. I became invested in UFO research. I developed a little survey asking people their background, educational, vocational background, and then what they saw, what they observed, how they responded to it. So I got several sets of surveys, including Betty and Barney Hill, because their case came out about that time.
Right, yeah.
And Then in 64 and 62, 63, 64, I not only started surveying people, but I joined organizations. I joined what was called APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization out of Arizona, Jim and Coral Lorenzen, and NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Those two organizations later folded, and so I consulted with people in MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, plus other groups. So it's been an interesting history.
Wow. Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but I just want to say to people who are listening live a couple things. You can jump over to podcastufo.com, and on the left, right sidebar, you can jump in our chat room and ask Dr. Leo Sprinkle some questions. Also, you can call into the show if you'd like, and that's 603-967-4030. And I also forgot to mention that we are going to be talking in hour 2 more about, we're going to go off the UFO topic a little bit in hour 2 and talk about some other things that Dr. Sprinkle has been interested in. Free energy ideas, Nikola Tesla, and some other things as well. So now, going back to Betty and Barney Hill, did you actually investigate that case?
Yes, they were willing to fill out information about their experience, and then later I had the opportunity to talk with them on a New York TV program in 1966. Interesting thing happened. Dr. Carl Sagan and others were there. We were interviewing Betty and Barney Hill, and at one point, Dr. Carl Sagan turned to Betty Hill. He said, "Now, Mrs. Hill," he said, "you say that your memory, based upon the hypnosis session with Dr. Benjamin Simon, he was a psychiatrist that they went to help them understand more about their experience." He said, "You say you remember being on an examining table and the extraterrestrial was examining you with a probe in your navel?" And she said yes. And he kind of smiled in his charming way, and he said, "Now, we're all amateur psychologists here." And then he glanced at me, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." I said, "That's all right. My friends think of me as an amateur psychologist." He was about to tell her and the viewing audience that there was a psychological explanation for her experience. I thought that was arrogant. So even though he was charming when he did it, I still feel like it was an indication of how he was rejecting what she claimed was a physical onboard experience. So that taught me something. Along with that same year, I was at a New York TV program. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. Jacques Vallée. We were with some astronomers from Harvard. And it was intriguing because the name of the TV program was Flying Saucers, Fact or Fiction. In those days, the game was played between two groups of people. One group was labeled skeptics, and one group was labeled believers. And the believers, we were kind of muddle-headed, and we didn't really know what we were talking about. We didn't know astronomical phenomena, etc. Whereas the skeptics were portrayed as not only intelligent and educated, but also as much more in tune with what was going on. Well, over the years, the game changed from skeptics versus believers to skeptics and debunkers. We found out that some people were paid to make light of this and to make people afraid to talk about their experiences, whereas some of the believers were also knowers. Some of us had been on board craft and talked with ETs. And so the game changed, and then, of course, it was much more difficult to talk about that publicly because the Air Force representatives and others really held the sway. And it wasn't until just more recently that people are beginning to not only be observers, but witnesses. They not only see flying saucers and they see extraterrestrials, but they also testify to their experience. And then some of the witnesses are also reporters. They're writing their stories and giving people information about what they have experienced. So that's a very exciting trend going on now.
Wow. We have a couple of questions up on the message board. And again, people are welcome to call in if they want, 603-967-4030. They want to know, were you the first psychologist to use hypnosis with abductees?
As far as I know, there may have been psychologists in the U.S. Air Force who were using hypnosis, but unknown, publicly. That's a possibility, so I don't know whether on the first, but of course Dr. Benjamin Simon, he was a psychiatrist, and he worked with Betty and Barney Hill, 61, and I didn't start hypnosis until in the middle 60s, after I had gathered information from many people. Then I realized, in talking with Betty and Barney Hill at that TV program in 66, that Dr. Simon had helped them with hypnosis. Oh, well, I know hypnosis, so I'll help people. And so I started working with a guy in Boulder, Colorado, about his experience. And then when Herb Shermer, I don't know if you've heard that name, but he was a patrolman for the Nebraska State Highway, and he went to the University of Colorado during the Condon Committee. I think that was in 68. I had an opportunity to interview him and see if hypnosis would be helpful. He was nervous because it was on, televised, and so we got some information, and later he worked with another hypnotist and got more information. So that was probably one of the earlier hypnosis sessions, publicly known.
Yeah. The show producer is asking you if you could move a little bit closer to the mic again.
Okay. I'll try to do that.
All right. I know it's always hard to stay in the habit, but did you ever speak to Dr. Simon about the Betty and Barney Hill?
No, I didn't have that opportunity. Just talked with them on the TV program.
I see. Okay. And do you remember the... excuse me, you said it's a possibility that in the Air Force someone may have been using hypnotism. Would that possibly be in either like Project Sign or Blue Book or anything like that, or a different part?
That's a possibility. There have been people who are called insiders who have talked about their experience. And some people have said that there were not only dead bodies on the Roswell crash, but also there were some entities who were alive. So it may be that there were psychologists or other trained professionals who interviewed the ET. In that regard, more recently, there's some interesting people who have combine their experiences. There's a woman named Jacqueline Smith out of Ohio. She's written a couple of books on animal communication. There's a woman named Judy Carroll from Australia, and a woman that I interviewed many years ago, Sani Sato. She lives in Colorado. Ann Ulrich, editor of a little journal called Star Beacon, introduced me to her. She had described her memory of a previous lifetime when she was an extraterrestrial, and she's written a couple of books on her memories, one called Stranded on Earth, where she felt that she was an extraterrestrial, a gray, what some people call a zeta, a little gray humanoid, piloting craft that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. Well, now Jacqueline Smith and Judy Carroll have kind of teamed up. They're both bright people. I haven't met Judy Carroll, but she's hoping to come to the U.S. from Australia either this year or next year. And they are recalling what they feel were past lives as crew members on craft that crashed in Roswell. It's intriguing to me because they seem to have not only similar memories, but they also seem to have similar intent, and that is, like so many people who are so-called ET experiencers or starseed or contactees or whatever one calls themselves, they seem to have the intent that they are here to assist humanity to not only recognize its past from the stars, but that now we're ready to start moving back into the stars. And so they want to be on the side of those who are peaceful rather than those who are exploiting what seems to be the resources of the planet and what seem to be the main human interest. Some people talk about what's called the Anunnaki, the ancient ETs who came down from the sky. According to this view, these ancient ETs were both good and bad from the standpoint of humanity. Both the Martians who supposedly set up shop in Atlantis, northern hemisphere, and then the Venusians who supposedly had a civilization, Lemuria, in the South Pacific. Two different groups. And according to Zachariah Sitchin, who was born in Russia, grew up in England, and for a while was living in the U.S., he was one among the few who could read the ancient script or the symbols of those ancient scrolls. And according to his interpretation, the Venusians settled when Lemuria went down. They settled in southern Egypt, high up in the mountains, and the Martians settled in northern Egypt, down in the valley next to the Mediterranean Sea. So according to that theory or that history, there were both remnants of Atlantis, and Mars, and remnants of Venus and Lemuria in Egypt. Well, then along comes one of the kings, King Tut, who claims that there is only one God. And the Jews, following Moses, had the same view. As you know from the commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Meaning that on earth, the big God was Jehovah, the ET who had the most strength and most authority compared to the other gods. It's an interesting question that maybe someday we can sit down with ETs and ask them if that's the way it happened.
Yeah, this is all speculation. There's some interesting ideas out there for sure. Let's see, we have another message up on the board here, but I wanted to say that I actually know someone. I'm kind of close to someone that told me that when she was ever since she was a little girl, and still continuing to this day, she feels like she is from another planet. And I thought, and in every other aspect about this person, she's perfectly normal that I've always seen. It's really, and she never said anything to me about this until I started, exploring this topic and going into it. But she says, I just want to go home. She actually says she actually feels that way.
Yeah, many people feel that they want to go home, and some people will describe their encounter with an ET as scary, frightening, feel like they've been examined. Other people feel like they are being visited by the home folks, and that they are here as kind of pioneers or kind of settlers to help humanity orient itself and return to the stars. And so some of those people will say once they recall about what happened during the encounter, that the feeling they had is that they wanted to go back with the ETs. I had a young man, a football player in college, who had a strange experience while he was a teenager, and he wanted to remember more about it. I remember he was sitting in my chair, and the chair was being rocked back and forth, and I was afraid that the chair was going to break, because he's a 200-pound plus guy with his football body, and bright, nice guy, but his memory was not of fear. His memory was of coming down from the stairs of his friend's house, going outside, seeing a flying saucer, and seeing his family. And so his feelings were of sadness when they went away.
Wow. Let's see, the message up on the board here is, you mentioned early experiences by, seeing sightings. Did you ever have any feelings of being abducted yourself?
I don't call it an abduction, because abduction has various connotations. That's why Dr. J. Allen Hynek, this physicist, he started calling it encounters. Yeah, when I was grown, after I'd worked with many people, I went through hypnosis with another psychologist, went back to a 5-year-old experience where I felt like I was on board, talking to extraterrestrial, tall guy in kind of a spacesuit, his hand on my right shoulder, and he was saying to me, "Leo, learn to read and write well. When you grow up, you can help other people learn more about their purpose." So I feel like I've been trained or guided or taught, whatever you want to call it, as part of my history.
Now, you have a schooling background. You were involved in the investigation. Were you at that throughout all this? Did you also have a career going on in teaching or whatever it is? I know philosophy is kind of a narrow field as far as what you do in the world. But did you ever stay in that field of study?
I was trained as a psychologist.
Oh, okay.
I went to University of North Dakota with both teaching classes and counseling experiences. Then in 64, that was in 61 when I was in North Dakota. In 64, I came to the University of Wyoming. I was primarily teaching at that time what they called a guidance institute. Then after that first year, I was in both the psychology department and the what they call counseling and guidance. In 65, then I started in the counseling center. For 13 years, I was director of the counseling center, with both administrative duties as well as teaching and counseling. Most of the courses that I taught were graduate students. The first, although I did have some undergraduate large classes that I taught from time to time. So, but the later years, the director of student life, the dean of students, good Christian man, very bright man, but he was upset by my UFO research. When I tried to go from assistant to associate professor of psychology, that was given. Tried to go from associate professor to full professor, and I was in front of all of the Department of Psychology faculty, a dozen or so guys, and my application was rejected. One fellow tried to help me. He said, "Now, Leo, if you'll do this kind of a study and that kind of a study, then you can get those research results published, and then you can be professor." I said, well, I have my own interests. He looked at me kind of puzzled. He said, this UFO, is this like a hobby? And I laughed and I said, no, it's more of a compulsion. And he said, oh, you're serious? I said, oh, yeah, I joke, but I'm serious. This is what I do. And it got to the point where the dean brought me in front of somebody else, and in writing and in person, he told me that I should no longer engage in UFO research or reincarnation research during office hours, because I was a professor, which meant I could, do any kind of research I wanted to do. But I was also a staff member of the counseling center. I had resigned as director and was just a staff psychologist there. And so I said, oh, okay, I know how to play this game. I'll wait until 5 o'clock before I do my UFO or reincarnation research. For example, I was working with a young man who was a cutter. He would take a razor blade and he would slice his arm or his shoulder. And when the residence hall counselor saw him bleeding one time, he referred the young man to me. This young man was so bright. His scores, academic aptitude test scores, were much higher than the average student. They were much higher than the average professor. He was much brighter than I am. And so we sat down. I looked at his case history. He'd been to a psychiatrist. He'd been to a couple of other psychologists. So I knew that I was going to have to do something different. I said, well, let's learn self-hypnosis. He looked at me and he said, why should we learn self-hypnosis? I said, well, we know you're going to cut yourself, so we want you to be able to focus and really do a good job. Well, he had a good sense of humor, and so he laughed. He said, okay. So the more we got into self-hypnosis, the more we got into past lives, where he was a swordsman and an excellent swordsman. He would cut others down, others would try to cut him. And so he had this propensity to be on the defensive or on the offensive, depending on how you look at it, regarding other people. He was so bright. He had 3 years. He got an undergraduate degree. He was working on a law degree. He was going to become an international banker or business person. And so when he found out what was going on, he recognized what was happening within him. He was not only bright, he was psychic. He could sense other people and their attitude. And he would make comments showing that he knew what was going on. And sometimes if people were antagonistic, well, he would say sharp things, and they would say sharp things, and then he would go back home to his residence hall room, and he would cut himself. And so we realized that the nexus, the topic, what was going on was that he thought it would be better to cut himself than to cut somebody else, which is very moral. But it's also a waste of razor blades and blood. So I encourage him to use his sharp tongue to cut other people's argument rather than to cut himself with a knife or a razor blade. Never did find out what happened to him, but maybe someday he'll recognize that he's using his tongue rather than using a blade for his weapon.
Right. Yeah, it really is. It was really a sad thing when that happens. Let's see. I'm sorry. I had up here. Boy, I had a message and I just can't find it. Someone had a question. Okay. Matthew, hang on just a second. Oh, yes. Have you had any other encounters more recent than those two, or is that it?
Oh, people are calling me all the time. A young man from Michigan has written a book about his experiences being a Zeta. I'm getting calls now. The one that was probably more interesting from a historical standpoint was Travis Walton. The APRO people, Jim and Coral Renzen, sent me to talk with him shortly after his experience. Now this next November or December, I can't remember when it is, there's going to be a conference 40 years later after his experience, where people will be talking about his book and the movie Fire in the Sky. So I've talked with thousands of people, and what's exciting to me is that more and more people are not only willing to talk confidentially, but more and more people are willing to talk openly or publicly.
Right. Now, Travis just had a new documentary or film that just came out just very recently, I believe. It's being shown at a film festival. And from what I understand, it's he hadn't seen. I spoke with him maybe a month and a half ago. He hadn't seen it yet, but he said before it went on the cutting floor, before it was edited, he said they were doing a really accurate and good job. So I'll be very interested in seeing that.
Yeah, he was concerned about the other movie because he felt like there were some things that were not accurate.
Yes, he's mentioned that to me also, but thought it was better being done than not. He let them, take some grace with that. So those are kind of iconic cases, both of the ones you have talked about. Did you ever speak to the Allagash people, Jim and Jack Wiener and Chuck Foltz or any of those people?
No, I haven't talked to them.
Yeah. What are some other cases that you can mention that you looked into?
Between 1980 and 2000, we held what we called the Rocky Mountain UFO Conference at the University of Wyoming, here in Laramie, Wyoming. I left the university in '89. I couldn't handle the pressure anymore, but some people were willing to continue with the program. Dr. June Parnell, she did her dissertation with cases that I had worked with. I worked with people who not only were willing to talk about their background and their encounters, but they were also willing to take personality inventories so that we could compare their personality profile with the general public or the general examined individuals. What she found was that these people are, quote, normal, unquote, in a psychological sense. In fact, in some ways, they're kind of supernormal. There were some profiles that showed their kind of a suspicious nature, kind of a heightened awareness. But in terms of intelligence and education, more women than men were willing to complete the surveys. But in general, these people would be perceived as good persons, masters, college graduate level, some with graduate courses studies. So not only bright and educated, but also with strengths of various kind, along with the suspicious or skeptical nature. So what we found in that series of conferences between 1980 and 2000, every year start off with 100, 150 people, then it get be 200, 300 people. Most of them were not only willing to share their experiences with one another, they were willing to stand up and talk in front of everybody. I remember one young man, he said, "My knees are shaking." He said, "I belong to a club that talks publicly, and yet talking about his own personal experience was a little different." And I remember a couple of women who were interesting, a mother and a daughter. The mother was a teacher in New Mexico. The daughter was a psychiatric social worker in California. And they came back the following year that they were there, and they said they had each talked with each other about their hybrid children. They had not been able to be courageous enough to tell each other what they had experienced. As many women have said, they felt like they became pregnant, but not at the human level. The gestation period was cut short. The fetus seemed to be taken away. And they talked about that. And then later they came back the next year and they had written a book called Healing Shattered Reality, in which they discussed their experience. And so there are many courageous men and women who are not only willing to share their experience, but also they feel that they are helping humanity to get ready for the next leap in our evolution, that we will recognize not only have we come from the stars, but we're getting ready to go back to the stars.
We have a question I'm going to get to in just a second on the message board.
Okay.
Well, actually, why don't I just ask it right now?
Okay.
And that is, can you elaborate when you were talking earlier on heightened awareness?
Yeah. According to my guides, and I don't know if they know what they're talking about, but I'm told in my meditation that there is, some people call it a change point, some people call it transformation, some people call it the Day of Declaration. This supposedly not only involves the public political announcement that ETs are here and that they have special energies. In fact, some experts think that that's the real cover-up. The cover-up is not of the ET presence. The cover-up is of the energy technologies that the ETs use. Because if we were to use that technology, what some people talk about is Tesla, Nikola Tesla, back in the 30s, he and a colleague were driving an electric car in New York. He claimed to get energy from space and then turn it into electricity. There's a couple of people who have developed little generators that do this. It's been patented. But this information is generally suppressed because if we had so-called free energy, we wouldn't need to burn the fossil fuels in order to create electricity. So whatever one calls it, the Day of Declaration or the Transformation or the change point, it seems that some people claim that we are headed toward this point where everybody's awareness will be increased. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it is described by various people as a shift in energy or a increase in frequency, so that just like if you use the analogy of light, if we're walking around and it's kind of dim and all of a sudden the lights are turned on or turned up higher, then we can see what's happening. Well, the same ways, if we all raise our consciousness and recognize that we are not only human, but we're also souls, and that we're part of not only the planet, not only the solar system, not only the galaxy, but the whole cosmos. If the whole galaxy were to increase in awareness, and maybe what we call the good guy, bad guy scenario will no longer be the game. Some people think the game is good cop, bad cop. That is, that the ETs are presenting themselves both as, quote, good, unquote, and as, quote, bad, unquote. Just like if we thought of ourselves as we're the patriarchs on the planet, we're the ones who are suppressing women and children, we're the ones who are polluting the planet. And so the bad cops come and say, hey, join us, and we will give you energy, but you don't have to tell the public about it. And so some people say that there's a secret cabal that has developed flying saucers here on the planet, and that they are in cahoots with the Greys or the the lizards or different people say different groups of ETs. And then later find out that all the ETs are working together to help humanity grow up.
Wow. So that's it. Say goodbye, if you would, to the first hour. We're going into the second hour. Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you. And in the second hour, we're going to be talking more about this idea of possible free energy. And I also want to find out, I have a couple of questions about abductions and abductees. So that's coming up in hour 2. Hang in there just 1 second. We have a quick music break. I never know what those clips are going to be when I click on them. That's an unusual one. Yeah, that's actually, I'm sure that's part of a movie from Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse out of Scotland. So the question I wanted to ask you before we get more into the energy questions is, since you've been at this so long, what is your feeling about the increase in activity in the abductions, or if that's even happening, or just people are more free to talk about it? What's your opinion on that?
As far as I know, it's not an increase. It's more of in terms of numbers of encounters between extraterrestrial craft and planetary persons. As far as I can tell, it seemed like it's an increase in the number of people who are willing to report their experience. I've talked to a lot of people who, some of whom have said they've had support from their families or their spouse or whatever, and other people who have not had support, and so they've been kind of hiding their story, partly embarrassed or frightened, but also partly not wanting to cause difficulty for friends and family. Now, some people will go ahead, even if it is not approved by their fellows or their gal friends. It seems like more and more people are willing to talk about their experience openly.
Right, and there are more groups and support than ever. But
yes, I want to mention one group, along with MUFON and the UFO Congress and other people who have been doing work over the years. There's another group recently formed called FREE, F-R-E-E.
Right. Yep.
That stands for Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters and Extraterrestrial Experiences. And if people are interested and know how to go online, they can go to www.freeexperiencer.co. And they've formed a science committee, they've formed a survey committee, they've formed a support committee. And so they're trying to not only use scientific and intellectual support for these people, but also trying to provide emotional and social support for people who are willing to talk about their experience.
Right. I think it's Ray Hernandez.
Yes.
Yeah, we missed each other. We were in Phoenix. I wanted to say hi to him and missed him out there. And I actually had Christina on the show, and a few other people talking about that. It sounds like they're trying to do a really good job with this thing.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, and the question I have about that, I do have another message, but I'll get to that later. The question I have about that is, how did these people handle this? What were their lives like when they had nowhere to go, no one to share the trauma with?
Very difficult for some people. I've talked to people who've been hiding, for 13 years. Some people have it felt like they lived dual lives, double lives. But I think that that's also part of the initiation, if you will. I don't know if you've heard the name David Campbell, but he's a professor of cultural experiences, and he has a model. The model is called the hero's journey. The hero is the man or woman who feels pulled out of society and then pushed into challenges, personal crises, kind of tests or examinations to see how they'll do, and then they come back into society with new knowledge and with new courage. The example that many people use is the story of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And the story is that here's this woman who has her companions, the Tin Man and the Straw Man. They're looking for success, or they're looking for assistance. They think that the Wizard of Oz is going to help them. Well, they find out the Wizard of Oz is a doddering old guy, and he just hands out the certificates. It's kind of like those of us who are professors. The students are the ones who go through the hard times, and then the president or the dean or whoever hands out the certificate when the person has completed the program. So if we look at it that way, then I often encourage people to consider shortening the process by saying, I'm ready. like SpongeBob SquarePants, I'm ready. And say, okay, if I need to be tested some more, well, then test me. And some people will get more tests. But other people, there'll be a shift. For example, a woman told me years ago that she was remembering during her hypnosis session with me that she was on board a craft. The little gray ETs had examined her, and it was painful, and she was groaning and moaning. And at one point, she said her memory was that she snapped, looked at that little gray, says, "Stop it! I don't like this." She said, "Take me to your leader, or take me to your supervisor." And the little gray looked startled, and according to her memory, walked out of the room and then came back with a tall gray who was feminine and much more compassionate. So it's like the idea is that as soon as we wake up and enhance our consciousness, saying, okay, we're Earthlings, but we're also ETs. We've been ETs, and now we're going to go back and be extraterrestrial again in our travels. When we are ready for the journey, then the consciousness shifts, and we become more able not only to tolerate the challenges, but we know that we have handled them and we are initiated. Just like a sorority or a fraternity member, or in the Army, we went through basic training. I remember when I was in the Army, one guy looked at me and he saw I was handling the stress pretty well, and he said, "Sprinkle." He said, "Do you like the Army?" I said, "No, not enough food, not enough sleep." And he said, "Well, you don't seem to be bothered by it." I said, "This is the easiest time in my life." He said, "Easy, easy." He was pissed at me. Well, I grew up in a farm family, and you had chores. You get up early, you do your chores, and then you go to school, and then you come back and you do your chores. I was lucky. I was in athletics, and so my older brother got to do the chores in the afternoon while I was in football or basketball or track. So the task seems to be to grow up, and different people have different meanings by that. But from my standpoint, it's not only to accept our reincarnation in past lives, but it's also to get ready for being a cosmic citizen. In fact, one of the papers, I think I sent a copy to you, are ET experiencers planetary persons or are they becoming cosmic citizens? And so when we're ready, I think the announcement of the disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence will occur, and also I think the announcement about the energy technologies will occur.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about that, but I also wanted to tell you that I am truly impressed that you know about SpongeBob.
Oh, well, my wife and I have 3 sons and a daughter, and we have 7 grandchildren, and so we get introduced to several cartoon characters.
Now we're going. I want to talk more about the possibilities of free energy, because this is going off the UFO topic, and forgive me for the diehard UFO people, but this is fascinating to me. First of all, we can talk about Tesla and how some people said he was crazy. Some people said he had the death ray, and they stole his papers. The government, it's pretty well known, the government took all his papers when he died.
There's a book that gives a good account of his history called Man Out of Time. A female writer. I'm having trouble remembering her name right now, but it's an excellent description of what Tesla went through. Right,
and everything we look around us today, and sure, eventually things may have been invented, but everything we see around us, the light switch, the alternating current, that was his. I believe he was like walking along and all of a sudden had like an epiphany and scratched it out on the idea out on a sand with a stick or something. This is, all this.
He and Edison were kind of struggling over whether alternating current or direct current is better, and of course alternating current had more advantages.
Oh yeah, and there was a terrible rivalry between them. But you think of this, and the poor man could have had all this money from Westinghouse. He let this thing go about the horsepower. I remember something about that, but he could have been a millionaire. Westinghouse was hurting at the time and let the whole contract go. All I'm getting at is this brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man was hardly recognized in his lifetime and died mostly penniless, which is such a shame.
The same way with Royal Rife. He developed the cancer cure technology, and several physicians, MDs, were helpful to him, but then later on, according to some people, the powers that be took over that information, and now Royal Rife's technology is not available medically. I sent some, along with that material I sent to you, I've sent that out to a dozen various editors in various, newspapers, journals, magazines, societies, and it's fascinating to me. And no one has acknowledged receiving the materials, and that's okay. But I hope that somebody will inform the powers that be that more and more people recognize there is free energy. There are more and more people around the planet who know about this, whereas here in the U.S. we seem to feel numbed by what we are told about free energy.
Yeah. There's someone that wanted to know, have you ever been threatened by any of your research into this?
No. Probably no need to threaten me. I'm not that important. But the professors kind of muzzle their own. Professors aren't supposed to be outspoken. We're supposed to be quiet and gentle and so on. So I'm assuming that anybody who is in a position to know about what I know recognizes that I don't have much influence.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell a story that I believe I've never told on this, but it's an interesting one. Now, my father was never known to fib. He had a sense of humor, but he was serious about this. Back in like 1974, right after the quote-unquote gas shortage crisis and all that, he had a friend that bought a brand new Buick, and it was a V8 and all that, and he drove it for a couple of hundred miles and noticed the gas gauge was broken, so he pulled into a gas station, and it took just about 2 gallons. So he's thinking, what's going on here? He lifted the hood, and he saw there was this bright orange thing, test equipment. So he drove it back to the dealership, and they wouldn't let him take the car off the lot, and he finally settled for 2 free vehicles, one for himself and one for his wife, and he actually settled for them. This is
wow.
Now,
wow.
I can tell you one thing. My father believed that story and believed his friend, and I don't know. I can't verify anything. I don't even remember who it is because it was so long ago, but the story always stuck with me because it has always baffled me and still baffles me to this day, where the best you can get is a Prius that gets 50 miles to the gallon, and I just don't believe it with all the technology that we have, that we can't do better than that.
Some people say that the automakers have a lot of generators and gradually are releasing, bit by bit, so that as the gasoline supplies go down, within the number of miles goes up. But sooner or later we'll get to the free energy, the Tesla, and then we can have electric cars without burning fossil fuels to create the electricity.
If you, there's a couple of theories out there kicking around, and one of them is that if all of a sudden free energy was discovered and implemented, that the world economy would crush and fall. And what are your thoughts on that? And then of course there's the one where the energy companies would wage war against anyone that would get close to something like that.
I'm not trained as an economist, and I don't know what would happen in the short run. It might be disastrous, but I grew up in a world of economic depression. World War II comes along. My older brother went in the Air Force. I went in during the Korean time. A lot of changes happened in our lives, and we adapted to them. My feeling about humanity is that if free energy were introduced, it'd take a while, it'd take a few years for us to convert from coal and oil and gasoline to these devices, just like it takes a while for a city to create a new power station and a new power grid. So my uneducated economic philosophy is that the economics is not as difficult as the emotional reaction of those who are going down. My general belief, and I feel quite strong about this, is that all over the planet the patriarchy is coming down. I'll mention one book that helps people if they want to read it. It's called The End of Men and the Rise of Women by Hannah Rosin, or Rosin, R-O-S-I-N. Chapter after chapter, she shows that there are more women leaders in military, law, academic world, the business world. These women are just as competent as men, but they are more compassionate, and they are more willing to discuss matters. They're willing to negotiate. So men tend to be more competitive, and these women leaders are more cooperative. Now, she says that the two areas, it is not yet true that women are the primary leaders in the U.S. One example is the Congress. There are more males than females in the Congress, and there are more males than females in mega corporations, because some people argue that we don't have a, quote, democracy, unquote. We have a system built on corporation. We have a corporacy. And that really determines whether we are good, bad, or indifferent. For example, there's recent dust up about religious freedom, religious liberty in Indiana. It was so intriguing to me to see that Walmart and some of the other corporations came in and said, hey, we don't want to have people discriminating against gays. We've got this kind of a business operation going. And some people said that the Indiana lawmakers are listening as much to the corporations as they are to the people. So it's an interesting question as are the corporations pro-democracy? Are they pro-business? Are they pro-well? It's interesting because more and more people, no matter whether we are U.S. citizens or whether we are from Nairobi or Australia, more and more people are less and less violent. Even though there are wars going on and people are losing their lives, being shot and bombed, in general, the level of violence is coming down. And in general, there are more and more people who are gathering in groups in a peaceful way to demonstrate for their particular view, whether it's anti-racial or anti-ageism or whatever it is that. And I find it exciting because we have been basing our philosophy on fight cancer, fight discrimination, fight.
War on drugs, yeah.
And whereas people who are Christians say, Jesus said, love thy neighbor as thyself, which is fascinating because that means we got to love ourselves first, then our neighbor, and then our God. Whereas the patriarchs, they turn it around and they say, no, God, you got to love, you got to fear, not love. You got to fear God, and then fear your neighbor, and then fear yourself. So the patriarchal view that men not only protect women and children, but possess women and children, and possess Mother Earth and can rape her for oil and gas, and that philosophy is shifting. And it would suggest to me that not only are we going to have more female leaders, but we're also going to have a more peaceful world.
Wow. Getting back to, stepping back to the energy situation, I really, really hope that, that would be the answer to so many things, but also just the fact that we're actually heading toward doom the way, for instance, every single week, China is opening a new power plant. And, the coal burning we're doing is out of control. And there's mercury in the water because of it. There's going to be, and I have a person that's been on the show. He's a friend. He's in Beijing, and he can't go out of the house without wearing a mask. That's how they live. It's getting nasty. And then the air currents will bring the acid rain and coal fallout over to the United States and the East Coast mostly. So, there's something that has to be addressed with this.
Yes, and then on the other side of it, the increase in nuclear weapons is also a threat to peace on the planet. There are efforts both to decrease the number of bombs and to negotiate arms treaty versus the other side of where people want to destroy the neighbor, whether Iran and Israel can actually learn to cooperate, even though they have quote, different gods, unquote, different ETs in their background. So it seems to me that one can either take the negative point of view that says we are killing ourselves, we are destroying the planet, which is true, or take the point of view if we want to stop that, then we have to embrace, I don't know if you ever see this cartoon called, what is it called? Anyway, it's of a character, a swine who's kind of naive, and a rat that's kind of sly and shifty, and other animal characters. And the piglet is trying to be nice, and he says, "Love thy neighbor." And the rat looked at him and said, "Have you seen my neighbor?" So, same way with Israelis and the Iranians. They're going to have to learn to live together on this planet. Otherwise, nuclear war, and we destroy the entire planet, or at least partial, and make it rough. So, to me, I take the point of view that it's a initiation, it's a crisis, and I'm hoping that we pass it successfully. Although one of my friends, who was kind of a skeptic, he said, "Hey, Leo, you're always talking about peace and nonviolence and so on." He said, what if we blow ourselves up?" And I said, "Well, we'll pick up our souls and we'll go to another planet and start all over." Oh, he looked at me and he said, "Oh, shit." He couldn't handle the idea that we could start all over again.
Wow. Getting back, I actually want to talk a little more about this because you've been around this for such a long time. And what do you think about the work that, like, Robert Hastings has done on, nuclear warheads when it comes to the UFO interruptions and things like that? Have you ever looked into that topic at all?
Yeah, he wrote a book about nukes and UFOs,
right.
Talking to ex-military people, not people who are active, about their encounters. And what's intriguing to me is that over and over there have been bases where the power has turned off and the nuclear warheads sit in the silo and they aren't sent. So it would suggest to me as a reader, and I'm not familiar with nuclear warheads or with, what it takes to run a military base. I do know over in Cheyenne there are silos and with missiles at the ready. But it would suggest to me that the ETs know how to turn it off, and so they are demonstrating it. And they're saying, you guys got to learn some other way to deal with one another, and then learn to deal with us, and we'll come and help you when you're ready. So that's my philosophy, and that's what I hope to instill in the hearts and minds and souls of those around me.
Wow. Yeah, that whole thing. I've had Robert on. I've had Bob Salas, and when someone that has a firsthand experience, you just can't explain that stuff away. It's just too baffling. It doesn't, a skeptic can't really deal with that.
Yeah, the best thing for a skeptic is to have the experience. The person is no longer skeptical.
Exactly, and that does happen. I mean, I've heard, for instance, an astronomer talk about that. I was on Bill and Nancy Burns' show the other night, and Bill mentioned that some astronomers that were doing detailed work, I forget exactly what he said, but they see UFOs and they get mad because they're taking a picture and it gets in the picture and it frustrates them. They have to take it over again for like a constellation or something. I don't know how accurate that is, but it sure sounds great. When you have gone through all this time, have your interests changed in different directions, or you're pretty much open to the whole topic?
I've been open to the whole topic, although my training is not technical. And so, for example, many of my friends in MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and I get a copy of the journal. But I found myself over the years becoming less and less interested in a detailed report of the sighting, which began at 6:43 and ended at 10:52, and this light and that light. I find myself much more interested in the people. For example, with Betty and Barney Hill, it was such a relief to talk with them compared to the other 1966 TV program when we were talking about flying saucers. Is it true or is it false? It seems to me that a lot of time was used to debate something that should be a non-issue. So to me, the secret keepers have kept up not only with lies, but they're much more skilled than just telling lies. Like say, no, you're a stupid shit. You don't know what you're talking about. They say, do you know about clouds? Do you know about cumulus versus this kind of cloud? And so on. So this question, and doubt allows the secret keepers to keep the secret, while the rest of us go about, well, I don't know everything, and so maybe they know what they're talking about, and maybe I didn't really see a flying saucer, maybe I didn't really talk to an ET. No, that's part of the master plan, is to cloud or disguise or to disrupt the public awareness that the ETs are here. The ETs have energy technologies. As soon as we grow up and play nice, we can use the energies to develop a better planet and a better humanity.
When you look into the topic of the UFO technology, what are your ideas, or what have you heard over the years that makes more sense to you, like the anti-gravity or whatever it is, how they can do the 90-degree turn and all that?
I've read different things. I don't have enough technical knowledge to be able to evaluate it, but I know that some engineers have been, a guy named Rich, for example, was quoted in one of, I can't remember whether it was Robert Hastings' book or another of the UFOs and nukes, quoted in one of the books as saying, when asked about energy technology, he said that it's not like a chemical propulsion. You know, we use chemical rockets to move to the moon or whatever. He said more like the speed of thought. And I don't know whether electrical propulsion systems, what's involved from a physical standpoint, but I know that physicists now talk differently than they did 20 or 30 years ago. The physicists in the old days, the old science, the scientist was objective, and he was the observer. Now the quantum physicists talk about everything is connected. Ions, atoms, molecules, everything is connected. And the scientist is a participant. Much different attitude about science, much different attitude about physics. So that obviously some extraterrestrials have found energy sources that allow them to move vehicles in different ways than through chemical propulsion.
Yeah. It's the only thing that makes any sense, and we have so much to explore in quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and I don't know if you heard that CERN is actually they're actually think they may have some type of breakthrough into another dimension that they may prove in a short time. I don't know if you heard anything about that, but it's...
No, I haven't. Years ago, I talked briefly with Edgar Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell, of course, has helped the noetic sciences and done much to illuminate the connection between energy sources, and ET observations.
Right. Yep. I've been trying to get Dr. Mitchell on the show. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, but I would love to have him on.
Another person you might be interested in is Dr. Jones, Dr. C.B. Scott Jones. He's a former Navy commander, and he's been on the inside knowing something about the military attitudes, but also hoping to move the public along to public disclosure.
Yeah, no, I'm not actually familiar with him. I'll look into it though. Let's see. Moving along back, let's talk a little bit more about abductees. Have you actually done regression with many of them, hypnosis regression?
Yes, I have, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And have you seen a consistency throughout the years?
In the sense of the reports, each person feels individual. My experience is my experience. But the pattern that I see is that the people who are courageous and who explore and try to understand, they do better than the people who are frightened and huddle over in the corner. So I encourage people, when they're ready, not only to explore through hypnosis their encounter, but also to find out, was it an abduction? Were they taken, or were they invited, or did they invite the person, the ETs, to come? Just like, it's kind of a silly story, but I tell, what if a high school student said, I was abducted. These guys came and they took me to a college campus. And there are a whole bunch of students, and there are a whole bunch of teachers and instructors and professors. Well, was that an abduction or was that initiation?
Right.
I encourage people to consider the possibility that what they feel was being taken away from the earth was actually being taken toward the stars.
Yeah, we had a message up on the board here, but I think you've more or less addressed it. Wanting to know what your opinion is of the whole phenomena. What would ET or whatever it is happening here be up to?
Yeah, some people said that there's two jobs. One is to educate, and the other is to monitor. The monitoring is what most people think about. I'll call it the MUFON phase. We are being monitored, and here was a craft that showed up, or here was a object, and so forth. And so if we think in terms of the usual human response, is that we are being surveyed, we are being surveilled, we are being checked on. And that, of course, frightens some people, just like some people are frightened because the police are checking on them. But are the police checking on them to harm them? Well, in some cases, some racial minorities feel, yes, that's happened. So we have the feeling that if we're being surveyed, if we're being monitored, that's a negative thing. But other people say, hey, I'm glad that the police are checking on our neighborhood because we've got something strange going on here. So the focus that I take is that, yeah, I've been interested in the monitoring, and I used to read all the reports I could get, but then I became more and more interested in the people and less and less interested in what they saw or what they experienced. I wanted them to tell me what they learned from the experience. Just like, exit polls, and you find out what people did in the voting. to me, that's more fun than it is a pre-poll. And the same way, to find out from people after their encounter, rather than to talk to people about the possibility of an encounter.
I have to say that the thing that I think makes most sense is more along exactly what you just said, and that is, I think it's very possible that we are being watched. Maybe that's someone thinking I might be going out there a little bit on a limb by saying that, but it does kind of make you wonder if we're being observed and watched with all the sightings that go on and the supposed ton of abductions that happen and all that. It just kind of makes you wonder what else it could be, really.
Sure. And many people say that their UFO sighting fits in terms of a message. Just like some people said, are there connections between the extraterrestrial experiences and the crop circles? And some UFO researchers don't want to mix up those things. They don't want me to mix up ESP and reincarnation and messages along with the sightings. That's just stay with one thing. The trouble is, it's like saying we want to stay with one topic in a college. Now, what would that topic be? Would that be science? Would that be history? Would that be art? Would that be music? No, if you're going to study colleges and universities, you're going to have to find that there are many, many, many topics.
Someone wants to know, now I think I've only heard someone say an account of this one time before, but someone wants to know, have you ever heard about E.T. where they were dropping cars? I think I heard something about that in a cornfield one time.
Dropping cars? You mean like automobiles?
Right. I think there was a story about that in some cornfield on some farm where this came over and a car was dropped from it, evidently picked up from somewhere else.
Oh, interesting. I'm not familiar with that case, but if I were to read it, one of the questions that would come to my mind is, was anybody in it?
Right.
And where was it picked up? And then, is there a connection? Is there a message? That's always the question that comes to my mind. Is there a message in the experience?
Yeah, right. All the cases that you've researched over the years, is there any one that stands out to you where you think of it often like that was really something?
Well, there have been so many. I don't know. Like a woman who's from Canada, Harsh, she wrote about her experiences. So many people write about their experiences. What stands out to me is not so much the experience, but how the person handled it. Just like in counseling, when I would work with a college student, there are some students who came in with stories of poverty, some of discrimination, some people with sexual abuse, with verbal abuse or neglect. There are all kinds of stories of people who are suffering. What intrigues me is when the person uses this suffering not only to deal with his or her situation, but also to help others. And we find this over and over and over, that the people who, in my opinion, are heroic are the women or the men or the boys or the girls who not only learn to help themselves, but learn to help others. On the Tonight's news, we see some of the stories of people who suffered injuries or loss of limb at the Boston Marathon when the bombs exploded. And some of the families, some of the people may feel hate toward the bombers, but many of the people didn't focus so much on the bombers as they focused on how they learned how to get an artificial leg, how to walk, and then how to help other people who are learning how to walk. And so those are the stories that intrigue me, not only overcoming suffering, but helping others to deal with their suffering.
Right, yeah. And I think that is, part of our culture, and also part of how things work is, for instance, you were talking earlier about Free and other associations like that, where people can share, and the gentleman you were speaking to, his legs were shaking. He was so nervous talking about it. But those people, or the people I have talked to, seem to get a real sense of relief. And if this was truly happening to me, I don't know how I could, live a normal life. Okay, there's someone who wanted to know, did you investigate reproduction cases?
Yeah, I've worked with some people who say that they have a hybrid child. Some people report being on craft and seeing the hybrid children. Some people feel like they have had sexual encounters with ETs. Some feel that they have served more as, I don't know what you'd call it, implants, that they have become pregnant without sexual activity. And then later the fetus was taken, and they were told by ETs that their child was on board and circling the planet. What some people have assumed, and I don't know if this is true, but what some people have felt was that this is a secondary program. The primary program is to help humans grow up and get ready for returning to the stars. But the secondary program is if we kill ourselves off or we destroy the planet, or at least destroy humanity, then the hybrid children would take over, and they would be able to replenish the planet. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting view that it's not a primary program, but a secondary program.
Well, they'd have to live with radiation, because that's probably the way it would go out. You know.
Probably so.
Yeah. And, we were talking about that earlier, and that's, I think there was some documentary I was watching about the nukes, and, we have cut them down, but I think it's like 20 times we can blow ourselves up. It's scary. And all it's going to take is some misread situation or third world country or whatever it is, engaging. It is scary times, and there's nothing we can do to unring the bell. And
oh yes, there are things we can do. Are you familiar with Ho'oponopono?
No. Let's hear about that.
There's a book called Zero Limits by a guy named Joe Vitale. In Italy, it'd be Vitale. And Joe Vitale tells the story of Dr. Hugh Lin, a PhD psychologist, Japanese-American, who was living in Hawaii. And Dr. Lin borrowed a process from a woman, a Hawaiian woman. She used Ho'oponopono in dealing with contentious family issues, people who were quarreling with their family members. And so he developed kind of an individualized approach to use it. The story goes that he would sit in his office and he'd look at the chart of an inmate. He was in a criminally insane ward in a hospital, so there'd be rapists or killers who were housed in the ward in the prison, and he would look at the chart of a killer or a rapist or whoever, and he would send a message to the universe and to the individual soul of the person, primarily for himself. He would look at the photo and he'd say, "I love you. I'm so sorry for my perception of you. Please forgive me. Thank you." In other words, he was saying, I perceive you as a criminal, I perceive you as a killer or a rapist or whatever, but I'm sorry for my perception. His thesis is that he is responsible for his perceptions as well as his actions. Now, in our society, we think we are good because we are responsible for our actions. If I step on your toe and I break it, well, your friends would say, hey, Leo, come on, pay the medical bill for Martin because you stepped on his toe and you broke it. Well, if I have a perception of you that is bothersome to me, then I can use Ho'oponopono to deal with my perception. So what happened was intriguing. Not only did he feel better about himself working with these guys, but also, according to observers, after a few weeks and after a few months, the shackles came off, the medications went down, the staff would come to work, they were no longer threatened or attacked, and then after 4 or 5 years, the ward was closed. There were still some common criminals who were sent to other prisons, but they were no longer insane. So here's a beautiful process, and to me, it not only fits in mystical, religious, spiritual views, but it also fits the modern quantum physics world of the physicists who said that everything is connected. If a person feels that the people who are holding on to the secrets of the ETs and the people who are holding on to their fear of encroachment by ETs or by their neighboring nations, they can use Ho'oponopono. I love you. I'm so sorry for my perception of you, you asshole, or you jerkhead. Please forgive me. Thank you. So the process is meant to assist the person who's going through it, but it seems as if the process helps the rest of us, too.
Mm-hmm. Have you, through your long career in this, or study, or interest, have you ever been frustrated the way things are going, or you sort of got out of it for a while, or have you been steady at it ever since?
I've continued with it. The frustration that I would feel as a human is there, just like when I was told that I couldn't be professor of psychology, so I became professor of counseling services. And just like I was told, don't do reincarnation research or UFO research during the office hours, so I do it after hours. Then when I left, I was told, I left the university, I said, okay, I can't continue because the pressure was not only to not do my research, the pressure was on me as a person. And so I would say Ho'oponopono to people, and I left the university and went into a private practice. So it's better, from my standpoint, for me not to dwell too much on hate and fear. To me, I was taught as a Christian boy that you should dwell on love and compassion. Right.
On the message board, someone wanted to know that they heard that someone talked to Hynek, someone from the dead. I'm trying to understand that exactly, stating that ETs were not what we think. And what the heck are they then, type of thing?
That's interesting, and that may be true, but I myself, when I talked with Alan Hynek, I was on a board. We'd meet each year to discuss cases. I don't remember him saying anything to the rest of us along that line, but it may be true.
So what was he like to work with?
He was interesting. He was very bright and very charming, a gentleman, a quiet sense of humor. And I enjoyed work. When he left the group, well, it was no longer the same. He died in 1985, and it was intriguing because he and Jacques Vallée, also another PhD astronomer, they they talked about the UFO experience. I think, from my point of view, they covered more things than just, quote, abductions, unquote, people feeling like they were taken away. They worked with a lot of different kinds of people and felt like there were more messages that were available. And Vallée, of course, had a more historical point of view than many UFO researchers, and so he saw these kinds of stories in cultural mores and cultural themes much more open than the average researcher.
Oh, I see. We only have a minute left. So
okay.
real quickly, that was supposedly that someone had channeled Hynek after he died. I don't know if you ever heard anything. Did you ever hear anything about that?
No, I haven't, but I'd be glad to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't have any information on it. It's just that this was up on the message board. This has been a real pleasure. I consider you, an icon. Like I said, your name has been in print everywhere, and I've heard your name over and over countless times. And so it's been a real pleasure talking to you tonight.
Well, it's a pleasure talking with you. You allowed me to speak freely, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, it's always nice speaking to people that are intelligent and have an open mind. I think I think it's and we still have no real answer, but it's it really is interesting to hear the different points of view.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for helping out with the show tonight. This is Martin Willis, reminding you to keep your eyes to the sky.